how's it going, everybody? First of all, I want to give a big shout out to the guys up here at Grafton Archery. They let me come up here today and do this video with nobody up here so that the process doesn't take quite as long. I don't have all the background noise. So thanks guys for letting me come up here and use the shop to do this video. Come check those guys out. Best shop in town. They're just awesome all the way around. So anyway, this is going to be part 3. So first video was changing strings and cables. Went to a set of America's Best. Second video was accessories, what I decided to shoot on the bow this year. And this is the final video of the build series. Part 3 is going to be arrows and arrow setup, arrow tuning, that type thing. Kind of how I went into deciding what arrow to shoot this year. Alright, so the first thing I want to touch on in this arrow build video is before you buy a set of arrows, go ahead and know what your end goal is. What do you want as far as your arrow weight? What do you want as far as what animal are you going after, or what animals are you going after? Do you want more speed? Do you want more penetration? What do you want? So let's kind of jump into how I made my decision this year. So I know that I'm going to be hunting elk. That's probably going to be an every year or every other year type thing for me. So I want to factor that in. But 99% of the hunting that I'm going to do is going to be your deer-sized animals, turkeys, things like that, bear. Elk is going to be a one-time-a-year thing. So with that said, I don't want to build a specific elk arrow. I don't want to build something that's super, super heavy that's going to slow me way down on turkey, way down on deer, because at least the deer in our area, turkeys in our area, they're pretty jumpy and they will jump the string on a lot of your shots. So these past 2 years, I've tried to go to the heavier side, and with my arrow length being at 26 inches, it's really hard for me to get a super heavy arrow without adding components. So last year I shot an arrow that weighed 461 or 2 grains, something like that, and I had really good success with it. It was a little heavier than what I've shot in the past, but I really like the penetration in the target. So this is the arrow that I shot last year. This is my Malbetti arrow. I've shot 2 deer and a turkey, I think, with this arrow now, and I've had really good success with it. Now, one reason why I'm changing this year is with my new setup, this RX4, I was getting a constant right and high tear, and for whatever reason, I'm not an arrow expert by any means. For whatever reason, this bow did not like this arrow setup. It just didn't. I could get it to shoot accurately and I could tune it to get it to shoot broadheads, but when I got to that point, my bow was just completely out of tune. I went ahead and started looking and trying to research and figure out how I could change my arrow setup to maybe help myself this year. So, starting into that search, what I did is I kept the same arrow setup, but all I did was change vanes. So I went to a 3-inch X2 vane. I think it's Q2I, I think is who makes them, but this is a 3-inch vane, a little lower profile than a blazer, and it is actually quieter than shooting a blazer with field tips. So that's where I went to begin with. Had the same results, broadhead still dropping out, still shooting a little high tear. So then I went to a 4-fletch heat vane. Same thing, no change. So then I thought, okay, my arrow is too light, the arrow spine is too light, I should say. So I had some 300s at the house, cut to the same length, same 75 grain insert, shooting a 3-fletch blazer, same exact tear, didn't change. Broadhead still dropping out, didn't change. So what I did is I went ahead and shortened a 340. I had some 340s at the house that were about a 1/4 inch shorter than the match grades that I'm shooting now. And I went to that with a 4-fletch Blazer X2, their smaller profile vane. And this arrow shot really good, but didn't group very well, I should say. The broadhead didn't drop out, but the arrows, you'll notice when you're shooting certain arrows, your groups just don't group as well. So, went to this arrow, shot great as far as the broadhead didn't drop out, but I just couldn't get it to group a very tight group. So, Went away from this one here with the X2 vanes. That one was the one that was a 1/4 inch shorter, so it was like 25 3/4 on the length. This one here. So I tried a even shorter arrow. I went cut it down even shorter. Shooting a 27 inch draw, I'm able to, you know, cut my arrows pretty short. I try not to go lower than 26 inches because I feel like you just take the flex out of the arrow. It's getting so stiff where your arrow is just not flexing a whole lot. So I cut it down even shorter. Still the same thing, the arrow shot good. This one had me around 450 grains, I think, with the 75 grain brass insert. Didn't really have good success with that either. So from there, what I decided to do was take the 75 grain brass insert that I normally shoot, break the 25 grains section off, and go to a 50 grain brass insert up front. I did that with the same arrow length that I shot last year, and throughout this process I had been throwing up the idea of going to a 4 Fletch blazer. So a lot of guys out there talk about how loud a blazer vane is, and that is true. They are louder than the other vanes that I talked about. Every one of these vanes is quieter than shooting a blazer with field tips. That's the caveat. Once you screw on a fixed blade, it doesn't matter if it's a solid fixed blade like my Q80 Exodus, what I'm shooting here, or even expandables like this Rage Hypodermic Plus P right here. You screw this on the end of it, and I promise you, you will not be able to tell the difference between what Fletch combination you're shooting. So, at least for me. That may not be for everybody, but for me, I could not tell a difference. So I don't think an animal is going to be able to tell a difference. The 4 Fletch gives you more stability, and I can tell a big difference in the wind. When I'm shooting in the yard without wind, I can't tell much of a difference. But with wind, I can tell that the 4 Fletch blazer does help stabilize the arrow. So, since I went to a 50 grain brass insert, I'm losing F.O.C. A lot of guys want to try to stay around the 15 grains per 15% weight forward F.O.C. So when I went to the 50 grain, that pushed my F.O.C. back a little bit, and I want to say when I checked this, I was shooting like 13% F.O.C. I want to say, with the four blazer vanes. I like to shoot a wrap, but I didn't want to add that extra weight back there, so that's why I went away from a wrap this year. So with all that said, knowing that I want to shoot elk, I want something that's heavy enough to penetrate elk at distance out to 60 yards in a target with field tips. This arrow here is penetrating just a little bit deeper than what my 460 some grain arrow was last year. And with a field tip and a broadhead, these arrows are shooting identical, no change whatsoever. The cool thing about it is when I went to that 25 grain brass insert up front, I was actually able to put my bow closer to spec tuning than what I was able to before. With this arrow set up here, with the 75 grains up front, I was constantly trying to chase the front end of my arrow, trying to get the back end of my arrow to come down. Which had my bow out of tune, it had my rest up higher than what I would want it. So the 25 grains made a big difference on the front of this arrow shaft. So with all that being said, this is the arrow that I'm going to shoot for this year. Four blazer vanes, 25 grain broke off, so I'm shooting a 50 grain brass insert. I am shooting the broadhead adapters on these match grades. The broadhead adapters make a big difference. I'm also shooting a 100 grain field tip and broadhead combination. So total arrow weight like 436, 438 grains. You know, not light, not heavy, and it's middle ground, and it works. This arrow weight works great for me, and I've had great penetration on everything I've shot. So I have never shot an elk, so I'm not saying that I have. I know there's going to be a lot of guys comment on here that talk about needing to shoot a heavier arrow. Hopefully I'll find out this year, but I have 100% confidence that this arrow is going to pass through or get great penetration on any animal that I'm going to shoot. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the process of how I build my arrows. I've got a new dozen Easton Axis match grades, thanks to the guys up here at Grafton for those. And I'm just going to go from start to finish on what I do as trying to make the most accurate arrow shaft that I can. So before I actually start cutting my arrows, what you'll notice is, hopefully you can see it. I don't know if you can see it or not, but that arrow shaft right there. So these are brand new arrows from Easton. Let's see if I can put them side by side. So I hope you can see that one of these arrow shafts, this arrow shaft here, you see the silver on it. This arrow shaft here is black. The reason behind that is I've got this arrow squaring tool by G5. This thing is awesome. If you're gonna make your own arrows, you need one of these. This is critical to getting your broadheads to fly. So, you see the difference in those two arrow shafts. One, I've sat down on this arrow squaring tool and squared the back end of it. So, these arrows from the factory come with Nocks installed. I took all my Nocks out and I laid the Nock end of this arrow shaft down on this arrow squaring tool, and I squared the end of this arrow shaft. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that on these arrows. This is the only one that I've done, and hopefully you can see a difference when I start doing this. All right, so right here you can see I got the silver end. Everything's silver, and I'm gonna go ahead and just run this on this arrow squaring tool. I'm gonna make a couple revolutions here. All right, and I don't know if you can see it or not. Hopefully you can. Part of that arrow shaft is starting to turn gray and part of it is silver. Well, what that tells you is the back end of your arrow shaft wasn't completely true when they cut it at the factory. So, a lot of guys will talk about squaring the insert end of your arrow where your broadhead screws in, and that is important, but you also need to square the back end of your arrow shaft. So right there, that arrow shaft is clean. We are good and square. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that to all of these, and then I'll catch back up with you here in just a second. All right, so now that we got the back end of all our arrow shafts nice and clean, the Nock end, I'm gonna go ahead and insert all my Nocks. Some of these things are a little aggravating because it's super tight, but that's what you want. You want your Nocks to be tight. And I like shooting white Nocks. I've noticed that shooting a white Nock, you're able to see the, one, you can see your arrow and the target better. And two, when you're filming, it's a lot easier to see your arrows flying through the air on camera. If you're a target archer, don't do it, because everybody else can see the back of your arrow as well, and they'll aim for it. But just being a hunter, I ain't worried about it. All right, so we got the back end of our arrow shafts all squared up and got the Nocks reinserted. So what we're gonna do now is, once you figure out the length of arrow you need, once you figure out what length of arrow you're gonna actually go with, go ahead and bring it, if you're gonna bring it up to the shop, bring your arrow shaft that you want so they can actually match it. Don't give them a length, let them sit in the actual arrow saw. So we'll get this set up. And like I said, mine are set pretty well dead on 26 inches. Right there. All right, so we got it set up. Let's go ahead and cut these arrows, and then we'll get to the next step in the process. All right, so We got all our arrows cut. Next step that I like to do, same thing that I just did on the back of the arrow shaft, I now do on the side that I just cut. So what you'll notice is that off the arrow saw, some of these arrows don't look quite square. The difference is what I do now is I take a silver Sharpie and I draw around each end of the arrow shaft. And then once I've got that end of the arrow shaft completely silver, I'll stick them back on the arrow squaring tool, and I'll do the same thing until the end of the arrow shaft is gray again. All right, so we got all the ends of them squared up, and that's definitely something that you want to do if you're wanting to make a really accurate arrow. Pay attention to how square the ends of your arrow shafts are, because they won't be completely square off the arrow saw. They'll be close, but they won't be 100%. So next step in the process, now we've got everything square, everything's cut the same length. Our next step is going to be actually putting in our inserts. So one thing that I started doing a couple years ago, ever since I've been shooting these Easton Axes, what I decided to do was use this boning. It's called Cool Melt. The cool thing about this is if you ever decide to change your inserts, or you get a bent insert or whatever and want to put a different one in there, the cool thing about this Cool Melt is you can heat up the end of your field tip just a little bit, and it'll actually you can pull your insert out of the arrow shaft. It's not that big of a deal on normal inserts, but with these hit inserts being down in your arrow shaft, if you're not careful when you heat your field tip up, you'll actually crack the end of your arrow shaft. So I don't have that issue with this Cool Melt, and I've also never had a insert pull out in a target or come out in an animal, so don't worry about that. So what you got to do here when you install these, like I said, I'm going from a 75 grain brass insert to a 50. What I do on these to try to get them all as close to the same as I can, when I break these off, I'll grab at the end of the insert, and I'll take these dikes as far to the end as I can, and I'll pop it off. You see the pieces here. That's what you want. You want the end of it popped off if you're going to a 50, which is what I'm doing. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that on all of these, and then I'm gonna weigh them and see how close they are. Some of them break off just a little different than the others and leave just a little bit of a brass end on one.
What he was saying.
All right, so we broke the ends off all these. I'm gonna go ahead and weigh them and see if they all weigh the same. So all 12 of them weigh the same. 49.4 grains is what this scale's saying. More than likely the scale's off just a little bit, but that just lets me know that all my components weigh the same. So we've got those broken off. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take this torch here and actually start heating the ends of these inserts up and this glue. So what I like to do is I like to stick my insert in just a little bit, heat my insert and my glue at the same time, and I'll start dabbing my glue around. It doesn't take a whole lot of glue. So I get that nice and hot, take my hit insert tool and go ahead and install it. I like to spin it a few times, separate it, and then I like to go ahead and take this piece of wood and work my glue off. Alright, and it is hot, so watch your fingers. And then I'll do that for all 12 of these. I'll go ahead and install them all the same exact way. Alright, so we got all the inserts installed, and what I want to do next is talk about this Broadhead adapter. So you'll notice on these Easton Axes that there's no insert sticking on out on the front of the air shaft. So there's really nothing protecting the front of that air shaft except for your fill tip or your broadhead. And one cool thing about these broadhead adapters is there's a lot of expandable broadheads out there that when they expand, they actually will pinch the end of this eastern axis air shaft and they'll crack the end of your air shaft. So these broadhead adapters add a little bit of a layer, a protection layer between anything else and the outside of the end of the outside of your air shaft where you don't have an insert protecting it. And also they add about 5 grains to the end of your air shaft, so they'll actually make your F.O.C. a little bit farther forward. So the cool thing about this, I've noticed that the insert or the fill tips that fit these air shafts are prone to bend because they're so thin. With these broadhead adapters, you can shoot an 11/32 fill tip, and they're a lot more durable and they're a lot less likely to bend. So you won't get that wobble in the into your air shaft like you will with the skinnier fill tips. So I always run these broadhead adapters. They've made a big difference in the amount of air shafts that I've cracked on the end, especially shooting rage broadheads. I've noticed that the rages like to crack the end of these air shafts. Anything like that, or a swacker. Swackers do the same thing. So anyway, broadhead adapters, that's key. So what I want to do now before I start putting fletchings on there is I want to show you something that I like. It's a tool that I use. And I don't know that it's really done a whole lot for me yet. I haven't noticed a big difference. But what you'll notice is, I don't know if you can see this or not. Alright, so hopefully you can see that. So if you look real close at the end of that fill tip, you'll notice that there's a little wobble to it. Alright, so this one here has no wobble whatsoever. So what that's telling me there is that the end of my air shaft is square and all my components are square. So the difference there was in the middle of that, I actually changed to a different broadhead adapter. And what that's telling me is this broadhead adapter is just a little bit bent, and sure enough, you look at it and you can tell where one of my expandables has actually nicked into this one and caused a burr. So that shows you there that if everything's not seated perfectly, using this air spinner can tell you if all your air shafts are true. And that's what it did. Oh, somebody just pulled in. But that's what it did. That's what this air spinner's for. And when I get done with these air shafts, when I actually screw a broadhead on there, I'll once again run it on this air squaring tool until I get the broadhead air shaft combination that pairs up good and I have no wobble in the end of my broadhead. And that, in my opinion, is key. Making sure your entire setup is square is one of the biggest keys to having an accurate arrow. Alright, so we've got everything installed on our air shaft. We've got an air shaft that we know is turning true. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take in the back and I'm going to show you what I do as far as before I fletch my arrows. I want to go ahead and make sure that I know where my nock needs to be as far as my my spine of my air shaft. So all arrows are going to have a weak side and a stiff side. So what you want to do is you want to put your arrows, your shafts, raw shafts, put them in your bow, shoot them through paper, and you'll notice that some of your arrows will actually have a tear to them. It's not your bow normally unless all your arrow shafts are doing the same thing. So what I want to do here to start off is I like to turn every one of my nocks. So if you'll notice on your nocks that there's a side that has a little tab on the side of it. Hopefully you can see that in camera. What I like to do is I like to take that tab and I like to turn it where the decal on my air shaft, if I can get it to turn. I like to turn it where the decal on the end of my air shaft is actually lined up pretty well with that nock, like so. So you can see the Eastern Axis logo is lined up pretty well with that tab on that nock. And I'll actually run that tab. Every one of those tabs is ran towards my face. So when I knock my arrow on the string, that's the end. That's the side of the arrow that I always have facing towards me. And even if you're shooting a 4-fletch combination, you always know you have your arrow shaft turned where your spine is correct. So let's go ahead and shoot this thing. I'm about 6 feet from the target. Hopefully you can see it. All right, so that's got just a little bit high right tear. So what I'm gonna do there is I'm gonna shoot this thing, I'm gonna turn it about 90 degrees and shoot it again. That hole got better. It's okay, bud. So I'm gonna turn it just a little more and shoot it again. Right there it is. So I don't know if you can see it or not. This air shaft, this hole here tore just a little bit high right. This one got better, but just a little bit high right. And this one here, perfect hole. So I'll do that with every air shaft. And what that does is that tells me that I've got my arrow, my Nock. They call it Nock indexing, I think, is the technical term for it. But that thing, the arrow shaft now is lined where it needs to be. So when I knock it on my string, that's where I'm getting the best flight of my arrow shaft. So I'll do that with every one of these arrows, and I'll figure out where they fly the best. And then from there, I'll knock them in the jig and start fletching them. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then we'll catch back up with you. All right, so we went ahead and got all these things turned where the Nock is indexed, where we got a good arrow flight out of all of our air shafts. And when you start screwing broadheads on here, you'll notice that some of these arrows just don't shoot broadheads quite as well. I haven't had a whole lot of trouble out of these match grades. They seem to all be pretty well true. As far as the spine seems to be pretty close. So what I do is I like to put a couple beads on the channel of the fletch. Go ahead and rub it down where there's not a whole lot of excess glue in it. Then I like to pull down on my actual arrow shaft, and then I start from back to front with the clamp. I set it down there and I wait, 10 seconds or so, let it sit on the arrow shaft, and then I just pull it off and continue the process. So I use this Bob Smith Industries, it's called MaxiCure. I've had this tube of glue for a couple years now. I've not had any issues with it. I got it on Amazon. It works really well. Pretty much all these fletching glues is super glue anyway. So I haven't had an issue using that glue combination with the blazer vanes. So normally there's not a whole lot of excess, so if there is, I'll take a Q-tip or whatever if I can find one. Right here. Alright, so if I got any excess, I'll just take this Q-tip like this, and I'll just lay it down across the back, and I'll clean the excess glue off. That's just to make it look good. So the combination I'm going with this year, once again, I'm going with the purple theme this year in honor of my Mall Betty that passed away with lung cancer. And what I've done the past year is I've had a purple and white Mall Betty arrow fletched up, and that's what I'm going to do again this year. But I think this year I'm going to run purple and white alternating fletches in this four fletch combination. I think I'm going to do that for all my hunting arrows. I'm not just going to do the white like I have in the past. I'm going to do purple and white in honor of her, just to go with my purple strings on the bow. And once again, I try to clean that channel out where I don't have a lot of excess glue protruding through. I just don't like that extra glue kind of sitting there on the arrow shaft. So let it sit, hardens up just enough to where the fletching sticks to the shaft. It doesn't pop up, don't have a lot of extra. And let's put another purple on there. Alright. I'll let that one sit. So once I get all my fletchings set there on the shaft, look at them and make sure I don't have any air pockets. Looks like I've got coming through on the on the fletchings, which I don't. So the last thing that I do is I'll take the same glue, and on the end of each fletch, I'll put a dab of glue. And I've noticed a big difference when I dab the end of my air shaft like that, or dab the end of my fletchings like that. It actually kind of protects the end of my arrow fletching. And if I shoot through something or I catch another fletching or whatever, I haven't had the issue with the ends of my fletchings popping up on my air shaft. And I've seen a lot of guys have that issue, and this seems to fix it. So that's just a little quick tip there. So, all right, I got a finished arrow built. Let me grab I got my broadhead adapter here. Now what I want to do is go ahead and screw a broadhead in. So, like I said, I'm shooting the 100 grain I'm shooting the 100 grain QAD Exodus broadheads. That's what I'm going to shoot for elk this year. For whitetail, I'm probably going to shoot these with a mix of the hypodermic no collars, the plus P's, which is their 1 3/4 setup. I'm probably going to shoot those. Maybe a Grim Reaper and these Exodus. I'm going to mix those three in for deer. Turkeys, I'm probably going to shoot the Rage Extremes. I really like shooting a really big expandable broadhead. I don't like to get a pass through on a turkey, so that's what I'm going to shoot for them. But as far as an elk arrow, this is 100% what I'm going to shoot this year. And let's go ahead and get a final weight broadhead and everything installed. Final weight here is 441.4 grains. Yep, 441.4. So let's see, let's take this broadhead off and we'll screw it into one of my arrows from last year that I put the 50 grain insert in, and we'll see what we get on weight. .4, so we're identical on weight, and that shows you there that if you're meticulous on the way you set everything up. This is an arrow from last year that's been shot for a year. I took the 75 grain insert out, put the 50 grain insert in, and this one here is brand new arrow, brand new setup, everything identical weight to the 1/10 of a grain. So if you're meticulous about the way you do your arrow setup, all these arrows will weigh the same, and you'll have a lot less issues with your broadhead tuning out at distance. And when I say distance, a lot of guys shoot their broadheads out to 40. Guys like me that are going to go out west, you're going to be shooting a longer distance. I recommend shooting your broadheads out there as far as what you're ethically going to shoot an animal. So say you're going to shoot an animal possibly out to 80 yards, shoot your broadheads out that far, because each yardage is going to make a difference on the way your broadheads fly if your bow's not 100% tuned and your arrow setup's not 100% correct. So hopefully you liked the video. I know it's long. Hopefully you sat through the video and kind of got an idea of the whole process of choosing an arrow and building an arrow. I appreciate you watching. Come up here and check these guys out at Grafton Archery. They'll get you set up on a great set of arrows. Like I said, I recommend these Easton Axis match grades a lot. I've had really good success with them. But there's a lot of great arrow companies out there, and there's a lot of great arrows out there. Just know what you want to do with your arrow and what your end game is. So appreciate you watching. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and come check these guys out here at Grafton Archery and give us a good review. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.